Top 10 Dreadful and Haunting Rivers. The flowing watercourse of a river can be a remarkable sight for those who relish the beauty and excitement of natural streams. There are, however, countless rivers around the world that are marred by unspeakable tragedy. 10. Toxic algae. When the weather in New Zealand becomes warm and dry, the Greater Wellington Regional Council must step into action, alerting all in the nation about the imminent danger blooming in the Hutt River. Toxic algae, Cyanobacteria, flourishes when the temperatures rise, posing a significant risk to humans and animals if ingested. The neurotoxin of the algae is, astoundingly, more deadly than cobra venom. What makes the river especially frightening is when pieces of algae break away from the rocks, allowing for one to inadvertently ingest the toxin. When the toxic mats of slime dry out, the situation becomes even more troublesome. The algae becomes, quite frankly, appetizing for children and dogs. Between 2003 and 2018, it was reported that 150 dogs died following a day at the river. 9. If you enter the river, you will die. Just outside the nation's capital lies one of the deadliest stretches of water in the eastern United States, the Potomac River. Despite being a tremendously popular destination for summer festivities, the cascading rapids claim numerous lives every year. In a fruitless attempt to dissuade tourists and locals from entering the treacherous waters, officials erected a sign in 2010 with the dreadful warning, "If you enter the river, you will die." Though the rhetoric may seem quite melodramatic, it comes 1 year after a group of 6 drowned in the river. 8. Floating graves. In January 2015, a group of villagers in Varanasi, India stumbled upon 100 corpses washed up in a canal in the Ganges River. Varanasi, which is the country's oldest city, is also the religious capital where millions of Hindus want to die or at least have their ashes spread in the Ganges in order to achieve moksha, eternal liberation. On average, 30 to 100 bodies are placed in the river each day after being set ablaze following a riverside cremation. Families who cannot afford a proper ceremonial cremation resort to depositing the deceased directly into the Ganges River. Corpses that are spared from being picked apart by wild dogs and carrion birds are left to rot in the river, oftentimes floating within feet of families rinsing their mouths or bathing. 7. Tormented souls of the White River. In the early morning hours in February 1887, the Boston-Montreal Night Express derailed, causing the train to plummet off the Hartford Bridge into the freezing waters of the White River below. The fireball that erupted caused the bridge to collapse in what is known as the worst railroad disaster in the history of Vermont. Passengers who were not burned beyond recognition were identified by remnants of clothing or personal items. A parent and child were discovered among the deceased, fused together in the final point. Were killed in the tragedy. To date, hauntings are reported along the riverbed where the disaster occurred, believed to be the souls of those who were crushed, drowned, or burned alive. People in nearby Hartford avoid the area if possible given the numerous reports of ghostly sightings. Throughout the years, passers-by reported having heard wailing and screaming cries of help beside the river while an eerie scent of burning wood lingered in the air. In addition, apparitions of railway workers, as well as a young boy adorned in 19th century attire, have been sighted hovering above the river as if standing on the ice. 6. The corpse collector. The unpleasant trade of being a corpse collector is sadly in demand on the Yangtze River in Wuhan, central China. On a daily basis, collectors are notified of floaters coming down the river, causing boatmen to insist on higher wages. This has stirred controversy in the region given that collectors began refusing to retrieve corpses, further polluting the third longest river in the world. The reason such an unimaginable and grotesque line of work exists is due to the unremitting tragedies the river has borne witness to for nearly 50 years. In 2015, for example, a passenger cruise ship sank in the Yangtze during a storm, killing 456 people, mostly senior citizens. Family members whose loved ones have not swept away in the water would later discover. 5. Corpse dumping. By the 1980s, the second longest river in the United States, Missouri, had become a notorious dumping site for dead bodies. The river's seclusion allowed for a convenient place for killers to efficiently dispose of their victims. More often than not, the churning currents would float the body downstream into the city. By the mid-80s, law enforcement in Kansas City began to acknowledge the fact that they were finding too many bodies floating in the river. This prompted recurrent water patrols on Missouri, searching not just for victims of homicide, but drowning and other accidental deaths as well. The most sinister of acts occurred between 1982 and 1995, when the bodies of 7 women, all of whom had their legs cut off, were found in the river. The youngest victim, Beverly Tracy, was just 13 years old when her torso was pulled from the murky waters in April 1991. 4. The Colorado River. Aside from the majestic beauty and natural wonder of the Grand Canyon, the Colorado River that flows between the canyon walls is marred by a history of tragedy. From the inexplicable vanishing of honeymooners Glenn and Bessie Hyde in 1928 to the possible slaughter of 3 members of the Powell expedition in 1869, countless sandstone inscriptions are seen along the canyon walls, each one marking a tragic loss. Physical reminders of the fallen are strewn throughout the river as well, such as the rusting hulk of Bert Loper's boat, a river runner killed in 1949, which is still lodged among the boulders. Every year, the river bears witness to an escalating number of deaths. Reboundings among privates substantially, as have suicides. Perhaps the most diabolic of events have been the senseless, vicious murders along the banks of Colorado. In May 2006, Japanese tourist Tomomi Hanamura was stabbed 30 times on her 34th birthday. Her body was discovered nearly a week later in a secluded section of the river. 3. An acquired taste. The Kali River, which flows along the Indian-Nepal border, is home to one of the world's largest and most vicious freshwater fish, the Gonch. Known for being a giant man-eating catfish, the Gonch was responsible for a series of fatal attacks in 3 villages on the banks of the river. In each horrifying scenario, the unsuspecting victim, whose ages range from children to adults, was abruptly dragged underwater as numerous eyewitnesses watched helplessly. Even a domestic water buffalo could not break free from the strange animal's grasp. To date, not a single corpse or even evidence of the victim's clothing has ever been recovered. When underwater investigators toured the Kali, numerous group sightings were reported. In fact, one of the largest going to be captured was one weighed 166 pounds, 75.5 kilograms. 2. The Congo River. Under the guise of humanitarian motives, Belgium's King Leopold II annexed the Congo, causing nothing but mayhem along the Central African riverbanks in the 19th century. Throughout the Congo River, depots were established by the king's officials, leading to the beginning of horrifying events often referred to as the Forgotten Holocaust. Villages along the water were burned, women were raped, men were executed, and even children were subjected to having their hands and feet chopped off. These atrocities would be a prelude to the horrors to come on the African river solids of Mother Nature. Case in point, an outbreak of the pneumonic plague occurred in a major trading center on the Congo River in 2005. Over 60 casualties occurred within the first 4 days, while hundreds of diamond miners were infected, ultimately spreading the illness throughout the river on their travels. 1. Cannibalism. In 1961, Michael Rockefeller, son of then New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller, disappeared while collecting artifacts along the Cobra River in New Guinea. Rockefeller's body was never found, leading many to speculate that he fell victim to a cannibalistic tribe living within the rain-soaked jungle. One tribe, in particular, the Cobra, continues to haunt the riverbeds, threatening to kill outsiders whom they refer to as paleo, ghost demons. In addition, centuries-old superstitions have led to innumerable ceremonial slaughters among Cobra's own tribesmen in an erroneous endeavor in which they carry out their butchery is unsurprisingly primitive, relying on stone axes, and bows and arrows. Those who commit the actual killing receive the honor of keeping it were a trophy.